Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Frontline Club's third book night. This is Pranvera Smith's brilliant and very special idea, because with this book club, you can meet the author. And it's a club that is not dependent on talking about just newly published books, but also ones we've been wanting to read for some time and which we already have read and love so much we want to share. So our initial authors were first Louis de Bernier and then Elif Shafak. And this month I am delighted to be chatting with and perhaps introducing some of you to Keggie Carew, whose memoir stroke biography Dadland, published in 2016, won the coveted Costa Book Award, and which was which is one of my favorite books of the last few years, if not all time, top 10. I've given it to so many people and I've recommended it to many more, and I'm kind of evangelical about it. Keggie joins us, as you can see from your screens and from everyone. Keggie, thank you hugely for joining us.
Thank you.
We have a good crowd here via Zoom, about 160 people so far. And though I'm so looking forward to having future events in the atmospheric surrounds of the Frontline Club just near Paddington. Of course, there will be Zoom, which will also be Zoom enabled to allow the widest possible audience. Now, as Keggie and I chat, I will aim to feed through questions from the audience, but please bear with me because I haven't yet mastered this, as I'm sometimes too focused on the author and the discussion as it rolls along, but I will do my best. So Keggie.
I hoped I was going to be one of those dogs, you know, that guy that came up as a dog. In his video, there was a special act.
Yeah.
I was rather hoping that might happen.
No, I guess that would have made it quelled our nerves a bit.
Yeah,
but
a cat. He was a cat.
I think he was a cat. Yeah. So, little secret: Keggie and I have met once before. Or we have met before once in Mandalay. Was that where we met initially?
Mandalay, yeah.
And then once at the Jaipur Literary Festival, and we had that drunken evening at the Penguin Party. Yeah. And then again, I think at the Frontline Club. Were you there?
Yeah.
And I love hanging out with Keggie, as do my other authors who've met her, in particular, Michael Vitikiotis and Victor Mallet, who may be watching now. Hi, Victor. And one of the reasons I love Dadland so much is that, Keggie, your voice really shines through. I mean, it's as if I'm sitting next to you. When I was reading it, it was as if, you know, you were sitting there next to me, like in the pub or at the table or on a train, and it felt really intimate that you were just telling the story to me. So you and I spoke a day or so ago, a little dress rehearsal, and you put me onto a podcast that you'd done recently for Pippa Kelly about dementia, suggesting that I cribs from Pippa's intro, which I'm going to do now, mixed in with some of my own words and some of the flat copy.
You shouldn't admit to cribbing, but anyway.
No, come on. It's credit to her. And to give you some background, to give the audience some background information, if you haven't already read this wonderful book. So let me begin. Dadland is a mesmerizing narrative that flits about in time, back and forth between past and present. It tells the story of Keggie's father, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Carew, a dashing, daredevil hero of the Second World War, who was awarded both the Distinguished Service Medal and the Croix de Guerre. In 1943, he joined Churchill's Special Operations Executive, becoming an undercover guerrilla agent, a Jedburgh, one of the first elite units to boast direct collaboration between US and UK intel agencies. He was dropped behind enemy lines in small teams, first in France and later in Burma, where he was liaison to Aung San. Born in Southern Ireland during the Irish War of Independence, Carew was a maverick, quote, a maverick, a left-handed stutterer, a law unto himself and well suited to an era of danger and adventure. That's from the flat copy. So he was made for this role, but perhaps not for Civvy Street, especially not in, as Keggie said, cold, staid post-war Britain. 3 times married Carew, father to 4, and with a laissez-faire attitude to child rearing in the best possible way, struggled to find his way after his career in the military, taking his family on ill-fated money-making adventures and precarious financial stability, or rather instability. But who wouldn't want to boast to their school friends that their Secret Service dad had been described by the Times of India as Lawrence of Burma? It wasn't until his final years that Keggie found up in his attic boxes of yellowing letters, diaries, and papers. Through them, she painstakingly pieces together the details of his remarkable life. The heartbreaking twist is that even as she's really and truly discovering her dad, he's succumbing to dementia. And these boxes full of treasure help her piece his life back together, and for a while help him do so also. From the cover flap, this book fuses biography, compelling Second World War history, and the exploration of an intricate father-daughter relationship. Dadland takes us on a spellbinding journey into surprising corners of 20th century politics, Keggie's madcap childhood, the poignant breakdown of a family, the bittersweet experience of caring for an ailing parent, and more. In piecing her father and herself back together, Keggie celebrates the technicolor life of an impossible, irresistible man. So Keggie's going to open as well by, and we'll learn more about Keggie as we go on over the evening. Do you want to open by reading the preface? It's just a short, not even a full page, to give the audience a feel for your voice and the way the story will begin to unfold.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that very lovely introduction. So here we go. Preface. It is 1964. I am 7 and barely eye level with the counter of the hardware shop in Fareham High Street. Dad is buying paint. We have been in the shop a while and I'm getting bored. He is joking with the shop assistant. He hasn't enough cash to pay for everything, so he gets his checkbook out. I smile inwardly because I have just thought up a trick. On tiptoe, I look over the counter as Dad signs the check, my eyes following his pen as it glides across the bottom right-hand corner. I squint a little, manage to hold my excitement in, then say, "But Daddy, that's not your name." Dad looks down at me. The shop assistant looks down at me, then straight at Dad. I look up at them. Oh, delicious freeze frame moment, for I have got the world to stop. I stretch it out with my round child's eyes. Power, a tiny taste of it. I have trounced him at his own game, the bluff, the double bluff, which is it? Dad laughs uncomfortably. They are the minutest flickering seconds when he doesn't know what to do, but they are enough. The shop assistant looks back and forth. "You rotter," Dad says in his foghorn voice. "You sod." This is obviously quite new for the shop assistant, who even as he takes the check and rings the till is not 100% sure. We leave the shop. I am prancing with victory because behind the bluster, I know Dad is tickled pink because I had him on the hop, which is normally his mischief. I was not to know it then, but I had taken my first unwitting step into his world, a place where you never quite knew where you were, where even this ruse of mine about his name turned out to be, in a way, right on the money. That's
Very good, Keggie. So can you remind me, I mean, of course I've read this book, but I want you to remind me what inspired you to start digging around in his past, and how did you gain access to the files, and why did you not have them before? And you said the other day you've been on this incredible journey which sort of fell into your lap, with one gift after another spilling out of the boxes, emanating from your research, etc. But tell me about those boxes and why you didn't have them.
I mean, I'd always known, as far as I could remember, that, because we'd had these yellowing 1945 Indian newspaper cuttings about, Lawrence of Burma, the Mad Irishman, Colonel X, and it was wonderfully exciting. I took them to school and showed off with those.
Okay.
And I knew that Dad parachuted out of planes into France, and I knew he spoke very terrible, well, very, very fluent French, but it was very gutter French.
Mm-hmm.
And there were lots of different bits of the jigsaw that we had, and he was a great one for telling stories, as my grandfather was. So he would tell, you know, funny stories against himself. One particular one was when he was running from the Germans in France, and he had to hide in a school teacher's house. Mm-hmm. And while he was there, they had the wireless on, and there was a message for him from the BBC. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary thing at 24 years old, to be in the middle of the World War, and the BBC is sending you a message personnel pour Basile. And so we had those stories, but they were just sort of part of the furniture. And what happened was, as Dad's memory began to go, one of the bits of access that I got was when my stepmother died, because I did not get on with my stepmother at all, which is in the book. But what it meant when she died is I suddenly had access back to Dad again, and I could get into the attic and go through stuff. And I found just the most extraordinary haul of papers, letters, all my grandfather's diaries. Mm-hmm. So what I was wanting to be a writer in a way. I was an artist, and I always sort of gravitated to books and narratives, and in my work anyway. And it felt a bit like the elephant stamping its foot in the room, that I had this incredible story. So why did I want to make one up, when actually, you know, it really, what it was a sort of an arc. It was like on the shoulders of this very charismatic, unorthodox man. Mm-hmm. It was a journey through the 20th century, literally. I mean, from you know, it started in Ireland, which was where he was born. Mm-hmm. He was born out of wedlock to an Irish, quite a well-to-do Irish woman who'd lost 2 husbands in the First World War. My grandfather was the groom in the Grand Castle. They got burnt out and had to run back to England. So it's actually started in war. Mm-hmm. The more I found, so I had all these diaries. I had found gun licenses. I found all sorts of things about Ballyseedy and Cork. And then I had, then when Dad had dementia, my sister and I got, what's it called, power of attorney. Well, she got power of attorney, and we got a letter which allowed us to get his secret files out of Kew archives, because they were locked for 70 years. So we managed to get those. And then one thing started to lead to the other, and I started just unraveling this extraordinary story that I had an inkling of. The other thing that was really important was that when my stepmother died, not so long after, he got an invitation to go to the Jedburgh reunion. Mm-hmm. Now, I knew he was a Jedburgh, but I didn't really know what a Jedburgh was. And one of the reasons was because my stepmother was rather covetous about that side of him, and they went off to do those things. Anyway, I took him, and it was just a room full of these 80-year-old absolute firebrands, all behaving badly, disappearing. And I suddenly got an inkling as to what kind of people they all were and what they were up to. They were absolutely astonishing. And one of them was my dad's radio operator, who actually only died last year. So I had suddenly this information was coming in, and it felt like I needed to tell the story, but I wanted to tell it, not just that sort of unique story of this extraordinary wartime life and stuff, but I wanted to tell the everyman story about it, because, you know, our family went very pear-shaped, and there was a lot of failure in with all that success, and a lot of grief, madness, love, war. It was just this massively sort of big arc. And I just thought, if I can capture that somehow, then that was what I wanted to do. So
it's an extraordinary achievement, you know, Keggie, because this was your first book, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean,
Well, actually, it wasn't. I did write a novel, which is probably why I was thinking that this is the elephant is in the room. I'm trying to make
okay,
up a story,
I
and
see.
I didn't get it published,
Mm,
but I, you know,
mm.
learned. I suppose I learned a lot in that process.
Sure. I mean, I was reading in the paper the other day that publishers in France are getting, they're sort of overwhelmed by submissions. They say everybody has a story in them, but, not, not everyone should let it come out, or can, it doesn't come out very well. And when I was first working in publishing as an editorial assistant, my first job was to go through the slush pile, which was this huge box full of, people just submitting, on spec. And a lot of the stories, are just sort of this kind of very linear narrative. Some of them had extraordinary careers. There would be older chaps writing in their life stories, sending their original photographs, not even recorded mail. And but one of the great things about this book is that you do create that narrative arc. You found it, and you're weaving in your family history as well, your modern family history, and showing the color of the man, and the fact that you show that there wasn't just heroics. You show the very personal faults and failings of him, and that's what makes this more kind of identifiable to everyone else. And you show, as you say, you weave in Irish history and modern British history and Burmese history, and it all works. It just works.
Do just exactly what I want, which I think is the advantage of being an artist for so many years, and being vaguely quite like my dad, in that I was quite unemployable and went off on my own thing and lived in Ireland and went to South America, and I think there was an advantage in that, because I didn't have any fixed way of doing it, and I just did what I wanted to do, and I also just did what interested me. I mean, which is slightly problematic, because you go off in down all sorts of roads, and I spent a long time down some of those roads, absolutely riveted and fascinated, but and a lot of it you can't really use, but and also I suppose thinking, I mean, I think I'm quite a good reader, so that helps thinking about what is interesting to some, what's interesting, and what's a telling detail, and what is just sort of, you don't need to get from A to B. You can just jump in, and yeah,
it's a little bit like a collage that, if you stand close to it, you see all the different parts, but then when you stand back or move back, you see how it all fits together.
Yeah,
and it creates this big picture.
I sometimes thought of it in the way that I think about my life, and I imagine everybody else thinks about their life when they're lying in bed and they're thinking about, oh, my mum did this, and then I remember this thing, and then I suddenly remember something about my dad. But it actually does have a sense of structure to it, because one thing is leading to another, a bit like sort of being on a psychiatrist's a psychoanalyst couch. But so it had, there was a method in its madness, but and it was just about feeling it. I think it was really intuitive what felt like it worked. Oh look.
So Dadland, this book has inspired me to read Tant Mintju's latest book on Burma, as I said to you on the phone the other day, which I've had on my bedside table for too long. And over the course of your research, and it is clear you have done an extensive amount of research. There's a bibliography at the back, notes, it's brief, but a good overview. Can you tell me about the Burmese you met and who might have helped you along the way? I know you answered this question on the phone, but and when did you first go to Burma?
Well, I didn't. Well, I went to Burma the first time I went was when I met you.
And when that was 2017?
That was 2017. Somebody's just rung and they've left the thing off the hook, and it's now. I might have to go. I might have to go to the room and try and sort it out. I tried to go to Burma in 1989, and we got stopped at the border, and it was quite a story in itself. I'm just going to see if I can
go do that. So we're just talking about Dadland by Keggie Carew, and she's just sorting out her phone. Somebody's rung. I mean, I thank God my dog isn't here, otherwise we'd have the barking every once in a while. But this is the extraordinary story of her dad and her family life, and I'm just trying to fill some time here. And she's just beginning to tell me about Burma and when she first went to Burma and the Burmese who might have helped her write this book. So go on. You're
Sorry
right.
about that. It was just, I don't know if you could hear it was blaring in the background.
It's all right.
What happened was, I mean, this is another thing about how things, it's almost as if there is something out there feeding you stuff. But in 1988, my dad got this letter from Michael Aris, who was Aung San Suu Kyi's husband. And in that letter, there was a photograph of Dad's Burmese comrade who was dropped into the Burmese jungle with him, because they went in with Burmese teams. And he wrote this very, very moving letter about always remembering Dad and would love to meet him before he died. He would love to meet again before they died. And Michael had sent it through Suu Kyi, who this young man wasn't young anymore, but he was called Tun Jaw. He was one of her worthy stalwarts, and this was in 1989. This is when she is just beginning to make these speeches to the National League of Democracy. And he wrote this at the time, I think it was called 888. It was a terrible clampdown of the military.
Right.
Now, my father couldn't fly to Burma because my stepmother didn't fly. And so myself and Jonathan, my husband, were going to be sent as envoys. And so we got as far as Bangkok, and then suddenly the whole thing flipped out again, and there were all sorts of arrests. And I rang my dad from the hotel room that we were staying in, and I said, I don't know what to do because it's all getting a bit heavy. And he thought that my presence in Burma, in visiting Tun Jaw at this stage, would have been just too dangerous for him. It would have brought him attention. And so his advice, and I felt it was very much his guerrilla soldiering was coming into the fore, said, I don't think you should go, not for you, I'm not worried about you, but I'd be more worried about him. So we kept away at that point and it was incredibly disappointing. I had this wonderful shortwave radio set as a present from my dad, and it was just very upsetting. But that was the nearest I got to Burma. Before, and then when I was researching, the closest in a way I got was through a book about Marxism and resistance in Burma. It was a translation of a book by Tempe Mint. And I don't believe it. It's now doing an alarm. Hang on, sorry about this.
It's okay. This is working from home.
Sorry.
That's all right, darling. It's fine. This is your funny phone that wasn't doing weird things when I tried to ring you, is it?
Can you actually hear that?
Yeah.
You can?
Yeah. Keggie's just sorting out her phone at home. Working from home technical difficulties. But we're just talking about Keggie's dad receiving a letter from Michael Aris, who
don't ignore it.
Aung San Suu Kyi. And Keggie went to Burma as his kind of envoy because he couldn't fly because his wife wasn't wanting to travel. And Keggie went out with a shortwave radio and wanted to give it to his colleague, his former colleague in Burma, Tun Jaw. And her father said, actually, it's rather too dangerous for you to go at this time. And so she had to kind of head back and never meet this chap. So her dad, I don't think, ever went back to Burma after the war, or after having after the war in Burma.
Yeah, I unplugged it. It's okay.
Yay! I'm just giving you an overview of where we're talking. Okay.
Isn't that typical? It's just like the only time when the phone starts making an alarm.
It's your dad. It's your dad. He wants to participate. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about
that.
So
you came back without seeing Tun Jaw. Yeah. And
came back and the next real I suppose, insight into what was going on, and this was from that Burmese point of view, was just the luck of Robert Taylor, this sort of academic who was translating this Burmese bestseller called Wartime Traveller, and it was written by Tienpe Mint. I might have pronounced the name wrong. And it was a real Burmese bestseller, but he had walked from Rangoon into India in the Japanese occupation to make contact with the British, to become some kind of resistance, to set up a resistance. And as one of the Thakins, he had contacts, and then he got polio, and he was in contact. The British took ages to sort of trust him, but he, my dad met him on a number of occasions before my dad was dropped in, and he gets mentioned a lot in this book. And so I was able to see what their relationship was like, and what they thought of him, and what they were thinking. So this was very much from somebody who was extremely from the inside of the Burmese resistance, and so that was incredibly helpful.
So your dad, as part of the Jedburgh teams, they're just teams of 3 people, right? So it's your dad and a radio operator, a local radio operator, right?
In France, it was teams of 3. It was there had to be a French speaker in France, so there was a Frenchman and either 2 British or an American and a British, but it was where this tri-national thing started. In Burma, they went in with more because they needed Burmese guides, and they needed, I mean, he was the first Jedburgh team to be dropped in the Arakan. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it as well, but he went in with, I think there were at least 6 of them. And then there was also another team of rumor mongers that they dropped in, so that they would just pass around rumors if anything would happen, so that the Japanese would just be sent off the scent. But there were a lot of files in the Q archive, so I was able to sort of piece it all together, with also things that he told us, so things fitted. But it was more amazing than I thought. I mean, I knew there was a story. I didn't know how amazing the story was until
you said in the book about that he had met Patricia Highsmith, right? And that they became friendly.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was like going through the letters and thinking, okay, now I'm in Trieste, so this is after the war, and he's working in the security office. He's got things were going off in between Yugoslavia and Italy, and the Americans were all very, very worried about the Reds under the beds, and my dad was the head of the security office, which was a great job actually, and then in a really, really nice place, and so he was sailing all the time. And so I'm reading one of his letters, and it was that was the other thing that was so incredible. His letters, he'd been dropped in as a guerrilla agent 3 times in Burma, in Sumatra as well, in France. And he was writing to his parents, "Dear Mummy and Daddy," describing his flat. And then one of the letters said, "Oh, I'm going out again with this very nice American authoress. She's just written Stranger on a Train," and he talks about it. But I think they became quite good friends. But I thought it was, what I loved about it was that, I mean, her girlfriend at the time was having toothache, so she didn't go anywhere. She was sort of stuck in the flat, and Patricia Highsmith and my dad would go to these cocktail parties and things like that, and be dinner partners together. And I just imagined, I mean, I know she was a very tricky person, but I just imagined they would have got on quite well, because he would have been interesting, and I mean, also I love to think that he was a great sailor. She was writing Tom Ripley at the time, and he was called Tom, and he knew a lot about silent killing. And I don't think Dad was like the model for Tom Ripley, but what authors do, they like to
mine people for information, and
but they also give people a name, and they I don't know. I'd like to think that he's called Tom because of my dad. That's the new theory anyway.
No, I think it has some substance, and I think from what you're, that's why I wanted to mention her, because you said some of these stories sounded so unreal, and I think she would have taken some of them and incorporated them into the novels that she was writing, and I guess he would, with his sort of kind of sensibility, he wouldn't have suffered her airs and graces, and she would have liked his his sense of fun, right? And so going back to names mentioned, dropping names, what about Mountbatten?
Well, Mountbatten, I mean, I think they just again got on. I mean, I think one of the things that Dad found himself was he was as a 25-year-old talking to people that he maybe shouldn't have been talking, normally wouldn't have been talking, but because he had all this information, he was running a guerrilla operation, they all wanted to talk to him. But and he got on very well with Mountbatten. But at the time, there were these huge fights going on. I mean, some of the telegrams going back and forth from the army. It was between the army, the colonial administration, and SOE, Force 136, which was called Force 136 in Southeast Asia. And they were all competing with each other in a way. They all had slightly different aims. And it amazed me how they didn't work together. They worked against each other. And Force 136 was sort of seen as all these people that were out of control. And one of the problems in Burma was, people like my dad, first of all, couldn't understand what the problem was with the Burmese wanting their independence, whereas the colonial administration treated them as criminals. People like Aung San and Tempe Mint were on the blacklist, and they were wanted to be arrest them after the war. And of course, the army wanted to work with them because they could see there was some, well, not all of them, but some of them could see there was advantages in gathering information. And Dad's first mission was incredibly successful. I mean, it really was very successful, and that was where he got his DSO at such a young age. And he was, I mean, the interesting thing, I suppose, was everything came to the fore, and he was allowed to fulfill his potential of being that left-thinking maverick, making decisions on his own, gathering. And he loved the Burmese, and he loved the people that he was working with, and he loved that freedom, and everything came together for him as a young man. I think he had a really, really good time. I mean, I think it was tough. He got malaria and he got all sorts of things, but I think again, he had a great time. And
some of the cables going back and forth, Keggie, about you talking about Mountbatten and this guy Slim, and with your dad, they were some of them were centered around Aung San, right? Because there was a discrepancy in the tale. Was Aung San, was he imprisoned or not, right? And there were two different stories. And your dad, somebody at one point they said, because of Dad's Irish roots, you're right, and Burmese sympathies, Cass B turned on him with threats of a court-martial. And your dad, ludicrous, exclaims. And Taylor asks him, because he was interviewing your dad, wasn't he, for these, he was taping.
Right, tapes, yeah.
Right. And he said, were you court-martialed? And he said, no, I think I was a bit uncourt-martialable to have convened a court while it would have been a bit going against the results. He laughs uncomfortably with the memory of it. And there's this, in one of the Burma tapes here, chapter 15, 1978, Taylor's interviewing your dad, right? And he says, your dad says, I talked to Mountbatten about it and he agreed. This is about Aung San, right? I talked to Mountbatten about it and he agreed. The Burmans were Burmans and no way could they accuse those chaps that worked for me as traitors. Mountbatten was the only one who agreed. None of the others did. Still in their minds, deeply ingrained, was that all those Burmans were traitors. And they particularly accused me because I was born in Southern Ireland and obviously an Irishman by nature. They thought I was trying to get freedom for the Burmans from the British like the Irish had. Then it was a very strong accusation. The best thing I did was to read 7 Pillars of Wisdom on the boat on the way out. I never forgot my lesson from Lawrence. I saw it all happen again. All the buggers sitting back at base playing, not seeing reality on the ground. I liked those Burmans and I didn't like those old boys drinking gin. I couldn't mix in their clubs. I was always totally unhappy. Come on, old boy, all those jokes and sex didn't please me, but I could sit down with the Burmans.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book, there's a story I tell, which I thought was very telling. And yeah, it was a story where he's in the jungle. He's the Japs know about. That's what they were called in a situation. We're after him, and he was staying in one of these sort of straw huts somewhere in a village. And he was like the top guy and in charge of the whole show. And he was sleeping on the floor, and one of his guerrillas came in, one of his comrades working in one of the platoons came in, and Dad was asleep and he had 2 blankets on over him. And the young man came in and just took one of the blankets, because Dad had 2, and just lay down and went to sleep. And it was the simplest thing, and it struck him so deeply, because that would never have happened in an English army situation with the officer, somebody coming to take his, and he loved them for that. And it was just this very simple story that I thought showed how he liked being with them. It just was logical.
Not natural.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to sort of move around a bit here to another strand of this story. Your dad going in his dementia. So, I mean, I told you, I confessed on the phone that I hadn't finished reading the book, your beautiful book, even though I've given it away and, recommended it to everybody, because, as an agent, my submissions tray is, overflowing. But last year I was with my dad, by myself, with my own dad. He was recovering from an op. He's now well, but he needed TLC and company, and it wasn't until then that I picked up Dadland again to finish it. And it was almost sort of kismet timing, just being there with my dad and letting him be and giving him space and not getting annoyed by any silly thing that, like, I used to. I might have done, perhaps. I mean, I remember one time my dad takes a lot of herbal pills and things like this. He's a kind of health nut, and he'll get up and he shakes the pills, and I'm asleep and I'm hearing these pills shaking, and I'm like, I used to annoy me so much. And then I thought, during this time with him, well, if he's shaking his pills, it means he's here, right? He's here, and that's like his thing, right? And so fortunately, my dad does not have dementia, though he does tell the same stories often. But this leads me to a thread to thread in a couple of questions from the audience here, from Carolyn Byrne, and she says, but before I go to that, I wanted to talk about your dad had in his pocket. You found this note. You didn't really know he was falling into dementia. You kind
he always had bad memory. I mean, he always had bad memory. One of the things he used to say quite early on was, that he was delighted to have a bad memory, because it meant that he had to use his brain to make stuff up, to keep his very intelligent brain constantly interested. He was quite an egomaniac at the same time, and yet he was a very giving person. He was just
but you found this
note. I found this note, and it said, "My name is Tom Carew, but I've forgotten yours," something like that. So that he showed it to everybody, so that they would tell him their name. And then I just started finding all these. I mean, I started finding all these notes, and some of them just very, very tough, because at the beginning, I mean, my dad managed dementia in a way brilliantly, because he tried to outwit it, and he used when it got worse, it was slightly easier, but at the beginning, when he could see that this thing was happening, that was the toughest time for him. And those notes were quite upsetting. But once we'd sort of kind of settled into it,
Mhm.
he used what he had, and it was a bit like this sort of, the onion peeling. He was still exactly the same onion in each layer.
Mhm.
And he was funny with what he had, and clever with what he had, and really good company. And
Mhm. Mhm.
most of the time, even though, I mean, I don't want to underestimate how difficult it was, but, I certainly felt you just have to go with it. He used to come stay in our house quite a lot, and he was quite free and liked being sort of wandering around the garden. And it was, in some respects, a lovely time because we had time together,
Mhm.
which, I'd missed out on a bit, as a sort of 17-year-old disappearing off around the world myself, and then not getting on with my stepmother. And I mean, we never lost touch, but there were, we certainly had a chance to, reconvene, which was nice. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, in chapter 4 of the section called the dense mixed what, you have it, there's some photos of a couple of notes, right? And you open the chapter by saying, Dad's pockets are full of notes. I find thoughts and messages to him jumbled up with the notes we have written for him. Tom is 85. You have 60 pounds. Keggie is walking the dogs. Anything in coloured biro is him. Ever since I can remember, he switches colour as he goes along. My bath thoughts. I do not go into the bath to clean, I go to think. I realize what the O was I eat every day. I will list every word that has disappeared as the orange has. Age 85, lost memory. Now I must tolerate and compensate. He does learn to compensate. Who am I, Tom? Sarah, my sister-in-law, asks teasingly. We wait, eyes flashing sideways to each other, knowing he doesn't have a clue. He picks up both her hands and looks into her face. You're lovely, he says, trumping us again.
Yes. Oh, that's how sweet. Well, that's
sorry.
thing. I think getting one's interlocutor to cry is really good.
Sorry, I shouldn't curse.
All right, no, it's great. It's very sweet and touching. Thank you.
So one of the questions here was from Caroline Byrne, forgive me. She asks, were there any unanswered questions rather than memories that your dad could not recall? And also question number 2 from her, we can go back. Were there any secrets or topics about his work that your dad would not discuss or would answer vaguely? So were there any unanswered questions rather than memories that your dad cannot recall?
Well, I think yes to both. He couldn't. I mean, one of the things he couldn't recall was his secret. He had a code that he had to remember in case he lost his, what was it, his map or something, and he had to send back his so that the headquarters knew that it was the right person that they were speaking to, and not that he had been captured by the Germans. And in fact, it was the Americans sent that to me not so long ago. And it was, his code was, and I know that he forgot that because he was always trying to remember it. And I thought, oh, I wish I'd been able to tell him. It was a really kind of boring sentence, like the coastline of Portugal and Spain are conveniently linked. It was something like that. It was great. So he forgot a lot of stuff. And, I found out a lot of stuff, but I had these clues. There was a few mysteries there was one mystery that's in the book that my sister and I we just couldn't work it out at all. And I don't want to spoil it too much. It's at the end, but it is a fascinating thing. I mean, my dad died before I finished the book. So it shows how long I was taking to write it. But there were obituaries in the Sunday Times, and the obituaries brought out a couple of things from the woodwork. And one of them was the brother of my dad's first wife. And he wrote to me, and he had gone and stayed with Dad in India with Margot, his sister and my dad's first wife. And I'd never knew anything about that. And he also told me that some of Dad's sort of nefarious work with MI5 after the war, chasing around Russian scientist, actually an Italian nuclear physicist. His escape back to Russia. My dad was sort of chasing him in Finland, and David Goodchild told me about that. And the other letter I got was from the husband of Dad's first love, and a photograph, 2 photographs. And I mean, I still can't believe it, but the photograph my dad had kept as well, exactly the same photograph. And they had died very, very close to each other. And it seems like they had both kept this sort of something between them. And she was the daughter of an artist, and she appeared a lot in my grandfather's diaries, who also liked her a lot. But the strangest thing was that my dad, and it was definitely a picture of my dad on a white horse, had written, he called himself Desmond, which is his brother's name. And like Nikki and my sister and I, we have just gone around the circles on this, can't work it out. So I don't know what he was up to no good again. So that fitted in rather nicely with my preface, amongst his many other personas. But so there were definitely things we didn't know. But as far as, but there was also, I think people always want you to sort of get everything fixed when you write a book like that. And it's not, life isn't like that. It doesn't fix itself, those things. But what it does do is it gives you a level of acceptance and understanding. And I really felt I'd been through the mill and back with this book in a way, but I did feel I really could accept it all, because there was a lot of grief. And I mean, my mom and my stepmother, and there was a lot of, I mean, I haven't stepped back from that fury. I decided that, if I'm going to tell a family story and a war story and a history story, I'm going to tell it. Graham Greene, I think it was him that said you need a splinter of ice in your heart if you're going to be a writer. And I think you do. I think you have to do it or don't do it. If you're not going to, don't do it if you're not going to tell it properly. I think readers know, so I thought it is going to be how it was for me, my experience.
So speaking of your mother, I mean, she was you said a codist.
Yeah.
And did she meet your dad out?
No, she met Dad in Trieste. She was, working in the Foreign Office, and she met him in Trieste in 1953. But they had been in Colombo in Ceylon together, because that's where I was just telling you before we started that, I'd been searching for the headquarters of Force 136, where there was this place called ME25 where they trained them in the jungle, which was hardly any training of the jungle. But I found in my mum's own photograph album the actual front, the Force 136, which is like 40 miles outside Colombo, and I mean that doesn't exist anywhere in any book in anywhere at all. She'd taken a snap of it she was the youngest codist. She'd been born in India herself, in Quetta, actually in Pakistan, and she was the youngest. She couldn't wait to get out of her family, and she went off to decode messages for the Free French. But they didn't meet there. They met later in Trieste.
And so, I mean, part of the breakdown of your parents' marriage was your dad's kind of his post-war. He couldn't adjust after the war to, as you say, Civvy Street, and he tried various money-making schemes. I guess he just couldn't.
There wasn't much call for guerrilla agents in Fareham in 1960, and he didn't have any money. He didn't have, he wasn't very good with money anyway, but they didn't have any money. Although they were kind of surrounded by it. His brother seemed to have a load of money from his half brother from the Irish collection. And so he was sort of trying to do stuff, and he was just not very good at working for other people. He always had, and he was inventing things all the time. And he was, he never stopped trying, but things didn't work out. He couldn't not be the boss, and that there wasn't a place for him. And they suddenly had 4 kids, and it was all very stressful. And we were having he really was a brilliant dad, and we had a brilliant time when we were young, but he wasn't a brilliant father. I mean, my younger brother describes him as a sort of Odyssean character, that he was, really good when he's living on his wits and with his cunning, but had trouble with women. And
he had 3 wives and a girlfriend. And
all of us, the thing about, I suppose, that the thing about it is that people did love him because he was really good fun to be around, because he was funny and clever and just completely different. And what goes with that is, like, people get possessive of him, or some of the women got possessive of him, and got problematic. And he loved women, and that was the other thing. So
I'm sure they loved him as well. He was a very attractive man. But you have this photograph of him looking like a hipster.
Oh, this one here I was showing you earlier, because this one is this is 24. He's 24, and he's actually he's just come out of the jungle, so he's got his beard, but he's obviously had a bath.
Oh,
but the one I loved, when one of the bits of research was, I found this clip in the Imperial War Museum, and it was just Tom Carew meets General Mansura and General Cowan, I think. And I went up to the Imperial War Museum. It's just a short clip to see it on the reel, and they set the reel up for me. And it was just an incredibly moving thing to see your 25-year-old dad, who was just on the cusp. And it was on the Rangoon Road as it was under heavy bombardment. And he comes out of the jungle, and he's got this huge, great, shining machete dagger, and he's wearing a sarong, and he's got his shirt's wide open, he's got this bare chest and a big beard, and he's talking to 2 generals, and that's right, you won't see it very well. And he's talking to 2 generals, and he's got that kind of Cheshire cat look, that he's got the cream, and it's a slightly naughty, pleased with himself look, and these generals are all buttoned up, and it's just that contrast, and I just love that.
Show us a photo of your
there
mum.
were lots of things like that. I mean, my mum.
Show us a photo of your mum.
Well, I've got that very glamorous one of my mum.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, so beautiful.
One of my mum that was taken by a very well-known photographer, I think. It shouldn't always look like that, obviously. But the other person to mention, I suppose, you mentioned Pat Highsmith, and the other person was Bill Colby, who was the head of the CIA, and that fed into the story. And again, that was from my past. It was 1976, and my dad had left home, and he was ostensibly living in his camping in a van in London. And I'd gone up on the train to meet him, to tell him I wasn't actually going to go to university after all. I was going to go to South America instead. And I was going to go to Toronto. I didn't know I was going to South America at that time. I was just going to America. And he roared with laughter, and he got out a box of wine, and he had a drink. And I remember he said, well, if you've ever got to make a choice, always choose the most difficult one, because that's the one you really want to do. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come up as a choice in the first place. And then he had a second thought. He said, oh, and if you're going to America, I'll just give you this address. So he got out his pen and went through something and wrote down this address on a card. And I picked up and I read it, and I went, who's Bill Colby, Dad? And he roared with laughter, because he knew I would never believe him, that he was the head of the CIA. But actually, if you read the book, that note saved my life, possibly, very possibly, because I was able to show it to somebody in a very difficult situation. And then, of course, he died very mysteriously, Bill Colby. But that was again, that was where all the different threads go in this book, and I go off into the sort of nefarious deeds of the CIA from the 50s to the 70s, which was quite interesting. So
spies often do die in mysterious circumstances.
yeah, well,
So look,
enemies.
I've got a question here from the audience, Sophie Paul. Yes, please, if you'd like to ask questions, please do ask them. We have, we're going till 1:15, I think. Sophie Paul, I love this book, she says, because of its intimacy and human quality, as well as being a rip-roaring story interwoven with the poignant experience of a daughter. Your stepmom reminds me of my grandmother and made me laugh at the familiarity. I'm wondering where you started with writing and researching this book. Is it a patchwork stitched together or planned flow? It feels so perfect. My mother has an amazing set of stories from her life, fully recorded nowhere. She loathes answering straight questions, although she has her long-term memory. If only I had your skill to bring it to life. Any tips, even if it's just from my own family?
Before I said I work intuitively, and I do work very intuitively. I do always think about what's interesting to me and cut out all the boring bits. It's the telling details, it's the stories. It's a bit like that Burmese story with the blanket. For me, that said a lot about, I understood what Dad was thinking about the Burmese, imagining him in the sort of straight-laced British society that he was in at that time. It was the World War, and how refreshing he found that. And so all the stories, I mean, there's a story that I told to try to sort of show what my childhood was like, and it was they're very brief little vignettes, and those are the stories that I could remember, because actually my memory is not very good. I mean, I actually just had to swat up a bit and think, Christ, what happened then and what happened, because it's been a couple of years since I've talked about Dadland. But what I am good at doing is remembering theatrical situations. So there was a point where we all were in the camper van having a picnic, and we were with some friends, and Dad was in the back making sandwiches, and he shouted out, okay, everybody, what do you want, brown bread or white bread? And so my friend Katie went brown, and I copied her and I went brown, and Nikki, my sister, went white, and Patrick went white, and everybody made their orders, and in lightning speed these sandwiches came out, and we each one got the right sandwich, the white sandwich, the brown sandwich. And then my friend Katie turned her sandwich over, and of course her brown sandwich was white on the other side. And it was just like, not that, it's a kind of nothing story, but at the same time that's what it was like all the time with Dad. It was like living in a poker game. And any tips, it is really, really imagine yourself lying in bed talking to yourself in a way, so that you're not being polite, or it's really trying to find the essence of what is it about the person, what was it about the situation, and really not holding back. I mean there are some things you obviously don't want to tell everybody everything. You have a responsibility to people, but truth can never be exact, because it's always going to be subjective. But at the same time, I think for me anyway, nonfiction is about, the facts were more extraordinary than I could have got away in fiction. So I didn't need to make anything up, but it was important to me to be as honest as I could and tell the story in as truthful way as truth as I could.
I think I'd say as an editor and as an agent, sometimes, what I've learned is that sometimes it's about what you leave out, what you choose to leave out. And as Keggie says, just choose the essence. So you're going to have this huge pie full of, fruits, but you have to find the slice that has, the juiciest bits. And, you can put the other parts aside for your family to read later. But if you want to create a story with an arc, there are things that you will have to just leave out,
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sometimes the other thing is, go on. Well, I was just going to say, sometimes you need a break, you know, so I would parachute stuff in that if I felt, you know, we've been too much in the Burmese jungle and there's been a bit, you know, too much politics. I needed a story that actually reflected maybe something about that, like, you know, my brother looking after dad one time, and there was a Spitfire show over the top, and my dad looked up and he had dementia at that time, and he just went, they're never going to get anywhere if they start messing around like that. He really thought he was back in the jungle again. So it connected, but it took you out of the story at the same time. So anyway, go on. Sorry, go on.
Okay, no, that's it. Don't be sorry. This is your interview. I have two questions from the audience here. One from Fiona Ord. She says, how wonderful this interview is. It's full of how lives evolve. There's often not much of a plan. An adventure evolves from the being somewhere. The idea was a start, the adventures follow, because adventurers say yes if asked whether they want to do something. Individual stories are fascinating. Thank you for writing your father's story. It's inspiring. So that was more of a comment than a question. Lorna Symes says, the themes explored in Dadland are universal, but at the same time, it's a very personal family story for you and your family. Did you and your siblings collaborate on the research?
They were incredibly helpful after I'd written the book. I didn't know if anybody was going to publish it, so I was working on this book. They knew, I think, I was working on it. I think my younger brother was just terrified because he was the most academic of our siblings, and I thought he probably thought I was completely illiterate, and he was just terrified. But I was very relieved that he liked it. But I think he was quite frightened about reading it. My family have been just incredibly supportive, and it's just, I think I dedicate it to my brothers and sisters, and I say at the beginning, this is my version, and they each have their own version, but this is mine. Because he was their dad too, and we did all have quite different relationships, I think, in a way, because we're all different people, and he responded to each one in different ways at different times of their life. But they were very helpful. My elder brother Patrick was able to, because dad told him some of the sort of slightly kind of juicier stuff about having prisoners in Burma and how they used to torture them, which was, do you want me to tell you how they used to?
Yeah.
I think it's in the book.
Okay.
Well, we'll pass on with that one, but it's not, my brother could remember dad telling him things like that. And my sister was really helpful with, some of the, normal day-to-day stuff about she's got a great memory. So they were all incredibly helpful and incredibly supportive. And I think I'm lucky having 3 siblings that were all supportive, because I know lots of writers write about their family and it doesn't go so well. So, and we all kind of felt the same about my stepmother, I think, but I think I felt most strongly, and me and my younger brother felt most strongly. The other, Patrick and Nikki, were easier going and not quite so combative.
This leads to the question from Heather Farnborough. She says, you don't mention your stepmother's name. I mean, she's a brilliant character in this book. I mean, although she appears briefly, but I mean, Michael Vitikiotis and I, we always go, stepmother. I mean, she's a great character, but you say you don't mention your stepmother's name, which made your feelings about her more powerful.
Yeah. I think that's the right thing to do.
Heather says, was this deliberate? She's obviously dead, but were you being discreet or just getting your revenge very reasonably, I think?
It's funny because people that it's been suggested that it's there's a bit of revenge, and I never have seen it as revenge. I've seen it as, in a way, expressing what it was like for me. But I think when somebody's A, won, which she did, and B, not here, how can I'm not quite sure how I get the revenge, because she's not there to be vengeful too, and I never was able. I mean, we had our fights, but I was always the loser in those fights, and my dad too was the loser in those fights. So she never. I felt it wasn't the right thing to name. I didn't think it. I thought she was very much my stepmother, and there was no other relationship that I had with her, and there wouldn't have ever been. So I just felt it was the exact right thing to do. And I've never, when I decided that because I thought, you know, it's a difficult thing. How am I going to deal with this? Because I can't leave it out, because that would have just been, it just would have been, I don't know, it just would have been like half the story. It wouldn't, all the explanations of, you know, the tensions and the difficulties I wouldn't have been able to write it. And also she had died, so I felt free to write about it. And it was really terrible. So I felt free. She didn't have children of her own, so there was nobody I was particularly hurting. And it was my version. And I felt, yeah, that's how I dealt with that. And I thought, well, I'm going to tell it, because I thought also a lot of people have this and they can't express it. And it is this, you do feel this tremendous weight of injustice when you have to deal with a relationship like that. It's complicated.
So I have here, Peter Humphrey asks, Keggie, how do you feel about the bits of the story that you had no room for in the book? What have you done or will you do with that surplus material?
Gosh, you know what? I was getting the book out, looking for photographs. Some of the things I'd put in a trunk, which is why I was going to show the newspaper reports, the old 1945 ones. And I did find a whole load more stuff. And I did actually ask that question to myself, what am I going to do with all this stuff? There was loads of things that didn't go in. I think I'm just going to put it in a trunk. And if somebody wants to dig it up one day, you know, I mean, he was a great character. They might find some more, but I kind of think that, what, you know, I mean, the book's quite long. I mean, it's not short. It's not too long, I don't think.
Oh, it's not true. It's just perfect. It's just perfect.
It's the stories in here. I fear, my only fear was I fixed him. You know, I fixed by writing a book and having it published, you kind of fix the story. Whereas there was many other stories in his life, not just the one I told. But
Belina Rafi asks, she's so looking forward to reading your book. And there's another question here, or kind of a comment here about how passionately, anonymous attendee, I passionately loved your book, loved your remarkable father. But what made me laugh a lot was what you wrote about the ghastly Rooksbury Park, where I also went, in which I loathed as much as
I know who this is. This is Fee.
I don't know. I think you must have been there a few years after me, but I guess Miss Glenday was still there, wasn't she? I just remember praying, please get me out of here. But look, to go down to Belina Raffi. So she says, so looking forward to reading your book. Did you ever get the sense that your dad had the violence of his work visit him? Any regrets?
Sorry, could you say that again?
She says, did you ever get the sense that your dad had, you know, the violence of what he had to do? You know, did it stay with him? Did he have any?
No, and I think that's why he was such an amazingly good guerrilla, because I mean, he was the most unviolent person you could meet. He would, if he had to do something, he'd do it, but he would never ever have violence in his life. And I think that's quite common with somebody that maybe has to do it every now and again, who's serious. Then also in the book is a story about that guy who took my dad's name and wrote that story. Yeah. Well, my dad knew he was a fake because he was boasting about it, but he was not a violent person, didn't need to be, and couldn't understand anybody who wanted to do that for fun, you know, go shooting or do anything like that. He couldn't really get that. He was serious when he had to be. He was a good guerrilla agent because he lived in the present and he didn't look back, and that was another problem for us in a way, because he was always sort of off on his own thing, forgot, you know, with a slight trail of disaster behind him. But that's why he was a really good agent. Yeah. So
So
going to Brooksbury, I think
Yeah.
there might be somebody from Boston listening, but it might not be the right time for her. But I also got have been in contact with a friend who also went to Brooksbury, who I hadn't seen for 40 years. So it's been a quite nice thing where a few people at this school, it's quite nice to know how they hated it as much as I did. I really hated it. But anyway.
So Keggie, just I don't want to finish just now. I've got a couple of questions here. You're writing another book. I want people to read everything that you've written, but particularly Dadland. So your other book you wrote, it's called Quicksand Tales, which you can really hear more of Keggie's voice. They're more personal stories to you, right? I mean, they're lovely sort of vignettes from your own life. And
they're funny,
just
awful. They're sort of funny, terrible stories about how things go terribly wrong. So that's why they're called Quicksand Tales. But I mean, I think that got sort of slightly lost in lockdown. It came out in paperback just as everything was closing. So it would be nice if that had a little life again. But yeah.
And what are you writing now? And what do you do when you're not writing? You run a farm, do you?
Don't run a farm. We've got in fact, my husband, we've got a little nature reserve, about 25 acres, and Jonathan teaches young people about nature and ecology, and we have barn owls and dormice and all wonderful things, and a pond and stuff, and we have a barn, and he teaches kids the John Muir Award and stuff like that. It's kind of, that's our passion. And what I'm working on at the moment, and I really, really don't do anything else but work at the moment, is I'm doing a book about a non-fiction book, and it's absolutely huge, and I must be mad, and I'm just finishing it now, and it's about the relationship of humans with the creaturely world. And literally from the cave paintings when we started painting animals to now, so that's like 2,500 years of history, and I'm sort of trying to cover everything, but obviously I'm going to do the kind of Dadland trick of all the good bits and actually quite a few bad bits, but I'm trying to make it really fascinating, and but it's just this huge labor of love. I mean, it's like Dadland, it is a real labor of love. So yeah.
So I wanted to sort of end by, I want the story about your dad going to the Jedburgh reunion, and tell us the story about the medals. Everybody was wearing the medals. Oh
yeah, that's him. Well, I'm sitting on the coach, and we've gone to Peterborough Cathedral, and this shows how naughty he is, really, and how egotistical he is, really, as well. And he's 80 something, and we're all sitting on the coach, and everybody's been told to wear their dress, their medals, and it's a Peterborough, it's a special service, because the Jedburghs, that's where they trained at Milton Hall, which is just outside Peterborough, and there's a Kohima epitaph in the cathedral, and they all go. And I sit next to him. We're on the coach. I sit next to him. We're at the back, and he looking a bit like down in the dumps, which he never looks down in the dumps. So it was like, "What, Dad? What's the matter?" And he went, "Oh," and I said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "My medals." And I said, "But it's great you're wearing your medals, Dad. I've never seen you in them. I'm so proud of you. Everybody's wearing them. There's John Sharp." And he said, "Yes, but mine are so much heavier than that." And that is that's with dementia. That's the kind of jokes you'd come out with, just on the over the edge, like not on the edge, but just over the edge. And he was naughty, cheeky, a bit of an egomaniac, and but just he loved life and just wanted to get every scrap he could out of it. So
I wanted to add that, I mean, this book, although it is, there is this sadness about your dad as he's dipping into dementia or falling into dementia, there is it is a sort of happy story, you know. It's like they say, you know, an obituary, it isn't about death, it's about life, and this book is full of life, you know. And that's one of the reasons also that I love it so much.
Yeah,
and
he had a really good life, you know, like it's you know, he really had a good life. I mean, when he died in his 90th year, I was completely devastated because I love him so much. But at the same time, I felt you've had a really good life, like every second of it. Every second of it he had, did everything, was everywhere. And he loved people, loved being with them. He loved helping them. He loved, he loved life. Yeah, he really loved it.
Well, look, Keggie, with that, I think we're going to wrap up. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. I was so looking forward to this event with you. I love this book, as you know. I'll quit saying it, but thank you so much for joining us. I know you're in the midst of finishing up your next book, so you've taken some time out of that to do that for us. And I want to thank Pranvera and Mario Armani for doing, Pranvera for launching this book night, and Mario for being our behind the scenes technician and magic man. And thank you to the audience as well for, you know, joining us on this this evening. I know it's a lot to ask people, you know, during, you know, lockdown evenings, but thank you for joining us. And I hope you come again and look on the Frontline website and see what else Pranvera's got planned for us all. And then we'll see you again soon. Keggie.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.